You did it. Welcome again to Walk in My Shoes. This is session 5. I'm so excited for us to have taken this journey together, and I don't know what your faith story is. You may not have one, but I'm just going to quote the words of Jesus, and maybe if you just see him as a person that had great wisdom, one of the pieces of wisdom that he taught was so profound, and that was that we are to love our neighbors as ourselves. I want you to think about that for a moment. The challenge is that if we're going to love people, we actually have to learn how to love ourselves. You see, the principle is this: you can't give love and acceptance to people of different diversities, ethnicities, unless you learn how to love yourself. I want to challenge you in this next session, as we've gone through a few weeks of this together, again, to be challenged about what does it mean to work in alignment. Last session, we talked about accountability and kind of partnering up with other people to get this done together. But then it's going to take these clusters of people not operating like silos, but beginning to link arms with organizations, with nonprofits, with businesses, with neighborhoods, and beginning to see alignment happen as we start to think like-minded with one another. You see, it's changing our mindset. And if we want to change our mindset, we're going to need accountability. We're going to need alignment with others. We can't do this alone. You can't do this alone. Many people are trying to point and protest, and they've found the problem. In Walk in My Shoes, we're trying to find steps to kind of work together to find the solution. I can't wait for this next guest. You're going to love this person. They have so much energy and are practically living out what I'm talking about. Alignment in a community and trying to make change as they walk in other people's shoes. Hey everybody, welcome to Walk in My Shoes. And man, we've had a few weeks together just learning about history, about race, about inclusion, diversity. We've had some just well-educated, just really interesting people about life stories and really just trying to model walking in their shoes, even though they were teaching us. And today is no different, and I can't wait for you to meet really a newer friend that I've spoken to previous to this, but his name's Kurt Owens. And Kurt, welcome to Walk in My Shoes. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
So Kurt, you're in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I don't want to date this, but I'm just going to say, and we are NBA world champions.
Yeah, man. I can't help but to date it because it's the first time in my lifetime. And
No kidding. That's what I'm saying. It doesn't matter if this is 10 years later. It still matters. We're NBA champions.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. So I woke up a champ yesterday. So excited about that.
So, Kurt, you have obviously an MA in Christian ministry. You an ED in organizational leadership. You've gone to school. You've done that. But really, I think the interesting part of your story is you've kind of gone to life school. And I think your story provides some texture and backdrop. And so if you wouldn't mind, there's some listeners out there I think would benefit from hearing kind of your journey as you experienced influence around race, inclusion, diversity, and really I would say just some transformation in your own life. Kind of give us the story, and I think that'll help us kind of dialogue with some questions about how do we get started from here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first off, born and raised pastor's kid. You know, my dad was born in Oxford, Mississippi, 1936, and so he kind of grew up during that Jim Crow era, and developed a mindset or perception of what race was all about. So he couldn't leave the South fast enough, came to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to start a family. And so, my journey kind of began, in the church. And, it was a tough sledding for me in the church. And so I found myself kind of turning to the streets, because the streets seemed to embrace me. And with that whole concept, I just had this mindset that like I couldn't be anything that I wanted to be, because like
Right.
my dad prepared me for a world that would not embrace me because of my skin color. So my church wasn't embracing me. Society, I had the mindset, wasn't going to embrace me, but the streets did. And so, I was in gangs at an early age, and as a young adult, became a drug dealer, and I was really good at that. And from that standpoint, what I did not realize is when I became too good at that, I became a target. And so I was robbed 3 times by gunpoint, been shot at. And it was like the third time that I was robbed where it just happened to do something to me. And during that time, I remember the gunman telling me to get down on my knees. I remember just asking the Lord, like, Lord, forgive me. I figured that's all I had enough time for. And when I realized that I was still alive, I'm just like, God made a way for me to escape from that situation. Long story short, I was able to escape, jumped off the porch, and I knew I was done with that life from that point in time. And so at that juncture, I knew I had to get a job, because like I wasn't going to sell drugs anymore. And I ended up taking a job as a delivery driver for a pharmaceutical company, making $7.50 an hour. So I'm still delivering drugs, but this time it's going to hospitals and doctors' offices. And the place where I was working just so happened to be in Sussex, Wisconsin. So it's far, about a half an hour, 35 minutes away from Milwaukee. But it wasn't a whole lot of people who looked like me. And so I was preparing myself to embrace racism, discrimination, all those different things. And the weird thing is I never experienced it, even though I prepared myself for it. And my boss began to put his arm around me, brought me into the warehouse, trained me on everything there was there. And then he moved me up into the front office. And from the front office, I worked my way up to like second in charge in the organization at that point in time. So from a period of about 14 months, I went from being told to get down on my knees to being second in charge at that branch, and got promoted to run 13 branches around the country in Jackson, Mississippi. And I didn't, I was blown away, because one, here's this guy that showed an interest in me that
Right.
looked differently than me and not supposed to love on me, but yet he did. And so I go to Jackson, Mississippi. Within a couple of weeks, I get a knock at the door from an older white gentleman, and he wants to share the gospel. And he shows me Romans 10 and 9, and I'd never seen that in my life. Remember, up to this point, I figured like the church didn't want me. And I struggled with that whole concept. If you confess with your mouth and believe in your heart God raised Jesus from the dead, you shall be saved. And I'm thinking there's got to be more. And I'm arguing back and forth with him. And he left, and eventually, I toss and turn all that night. And I wake up about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, man, if that's true, I've been saved since I was 8 years old. And, the moral of my story is like the two most important things that happened to me in my life in the secular world happened at the hands of someone that I thought could not love me or could not care for me or meant harm towards me. The other most important thing that happened to me in my spiritual life happened at the hands of someone that I thought that could not love me and would not be good by me. And so those two very important things that happened in my life has caused me to dedicate my life to a multi-ethnic lifestyle. I realize we cannot use broad strokes on large swaths of people, and I use the term racial reconstruction because my dad constructed me one way based off of his true experience. My dad's experience was true, but my perception was reconstructed based off of my experience. In my experience, I had positive experiences. And that's when I realized, there is a possibility for two very contentious communities to actually be in harmony with one another.
And I love what you said. It's not restoration, because we're not restoring something that we never really had. So we're rebuilding what it looks like in America to have a multicultural environment and society, and that's rebuilding it. It's a new build. What does that look like, though? Because we can sit in our living rooms, we can watch the programs, the TV, we can even watch these videos, but then push comes to shove, I got to go to my house. And what do I do? What do we do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the things that my experience did for me is it helped me to be able to see communities in specific target groups, because like not everybody is the same. And so I think when you're looking at specifically two sides of the aisle, you're always going to have your extremists. And there's really nothing that you can do about that. If a person is racist and don't like people of the other ethnicity, there's nothing, only God can change that. And so when I say that I don't protest, it's not going to do me any good to protest against someone that's where they're at. Like only God can change them. I can only pray for them. So there's nothing for me to protest there. But what I like to look at, I look at each group of people as essentially in 5 lanes. And so you got your extremists on the left, you got your extremists on the right, and then you have your mile left, mile right, and then you have the middle of the road. I focus my attention on the middle of the road, mile left and mile right, because these are people that you can actually have some conversation with and bridge some understanding. And so I don't lead off with protesting. I lead off with what are the things that we have in common. What do we both want to see? And these are people, again, where you could actually begin to start bridging the conversation and helping people to have some positive experiences. And so what I try to promote is because I'm the byproduct of having my mind reconstructed racially based off of my experience. Right. So if I can help people have positive experiences with the other, if I can help people to have empathy for someone of the other, I think that moves the needle forward more than protesting. So I'm not gonna do any marching, and I'm not gonna knock anybody who do those things. Right. I mean, there's probably a place for that. I just understand what I've been called to. Yeah. And God's called me to be a peacemaker. He's called me to be a bridge builder. He's called me to promote the gospel, because the gospel is the answer to the things that has caused us to have this great divide in our country, ethnically, and through race. So
I think, Kurt, you're telling us really is, you've been called to help kind of change mindsets, and you can't really change hearts. So if someone's heart's not willing to come to the middle and have a dialogue, and probably that's a good word for everybody listening, sometimes we try to pick the extremes to go try to change their minds. And you're hearing from Kurt, and I'm going to tell you too, don't waste a lot of energy there, because until they're ready to come to a place like a middle ground. And I think we heard even like to share a meal with you or to share story with you. So Kurt, you do Bridge Builders, and this isn't really a time to do a commercial, but I actually really think it's important that we hear what you're doing, because again, there's a lot of discussion around this around our country. There are a lot of committees that are actually trying to change some things that are in government and laws. But again, this gets back to the grassroots of where we live and how we're operating personally. So again, tell us about Bridge Builders, and then are there some things practically you would instruct us? Like if I'm living in a neighborhood you're working with, what are you asking me to do and be a part of?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you where it all began. I was preparing to plant a church, and my wife and I were planning on moving to Grafton, Wisconsin, a suburb. And we had enough of our neighborhood. We had been there for over 20 years, and just like, hey, it's a neighborhood that's pretty much in our mindset went to hell, and like let's get out of here. And I was challenged by when we were preparing to plant a church, because we're planting a multi-ethnic church. And one of the residents in that community came to the meeting and accused me of being a black face for a white church. It's going to make a bunch of promises, and we're going to leave like every other church. And as I began to defend myself, I talked about I went to school in this neighborhood. I grew up in the neighborhood, and all the things I did in the neighborhood. Went to church in the neighborhood. And last thing I said, in fact, I live right around the corner. And it seemed like the world stopped when I heard myself say I live right around the corner, because I had mentally moved out of the neighborhood already.
Yeah.
And it was at that moment that I realized, like, my greatest power and strength and the work that I do is going to be the fact that I'm a part of the community, that I live here. Not very many people can say that. And so I went home that night and told my wife, we can't leave. We've got to stay and make a difference in this neighborhood. And so and she famously responded, "Are you sure you heard from the Lord?"
Lay the fleece out.
And so I started going door to door, hearing the hearts of the residents in our community. And, it's funny because I've been there for over 20 years, but disconnected from everyone. And so many people are meeting for the first time. And the more and more I heard the hearts of people, the more I realized that it was more of us who were suffering in silence than it was of those that was bringing the neighborhood down. And I connected with a missionaries agency that was looking for some connections in the city of Milwaukee, and we just started hosting missionaries from all over the country who were coming into our neighborhood, and we were coming alongside some of the residents and helping them improve their homes. We were doing siding, we were doing fencing. But what I did not realize what was transpiring is, like, there was this cultural blending that was beginning to happen that I didn't see, because most of the people that we brought in were probably 99% white and had never been in the central city before in their lives. So people were coming from rural towns in Iowa and Pittsburgh. I mean, and this was their first experience, and we were able to have some amazing conversations. And our community was open arms to people that were coming in because they knew they were there with me. And that was the power behind it, because there wasn't, everybody was wondering, am I going to be perceived as the white savior coming into this community? And like, no, I live on this block. And I invited them all in. And when people saw, like, all of the activity that was happening, because we might have 40, 50 white people on the block at one time, and that gets a lot of attention. People were pulling over, wanting to know, like, what's going on here. And it just began to just kind of blossom, and people wanted to know more about what we were doing. But so what God was doing was he was building, bringing people together where our country was completely pulling people apart. Yeah. But here we were in the midst of all of that, actually bringing people together. So it wasn't about the fencing projects. It wasn't about the roofing, and it wasn't about, like, certainly we were improving the neighborhood, but what was really happening is people were able to build relationships with one another as they were working on the projects for a week at a time, and in some days even a day project. So Bridge Builders, our whole concept is to inspire inner city innovation that will holistically transform neighborhoods one block at a time. And we do that with what we call the 4 arms of holistic transformation, and one is cultural. And that's huge, because it allows people to have positive experiences with the other. So people that come in leave repenting, people that stay repenting, because they had this misconception about the other. The other part that we talk about in holistic transformation is spiritual transformation. So we want to be a gospel presence, loving our neighbor in our community in ways that cross cultural and ethnic lines. The other 2 areas is physical transformation. We do that by the projects that we take on and helping homeowners that can't afford to fix their properties. We come alongside them and we do that. And the 4th piece is economic transformation. And all 4 of those areas represent, like, holistic transformation. And so we operate, like, in the neighborhood. We have our block model is about 140 blocks. We have a hub house. We purchased a dilapidated property. We renovated it. We operate out of that house so we can be part of the community. I live down the street from the hub house. And on each one of the 6 blocks, every 6 blocks will be a lighthouse, and that's operated by a full-time missionary or full-time neighbor, however you want to claim it. And so essentially we try to infiltrate a neighborhood from the inside out And this is the same model that's used to destroy a neighborhood. So I know it works.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
so I just taken that model and used it for light. And so that's the whole concept of bridge builders. We have a community connections pastor in the community. Throughout his whole role is just in the community, serving the needs of the residents in that community. We have an operations pastor who also works out of that house. So there's always indigenous presence, but we bring in people from everywhere and from all ethnicities, and so you're just never in the neighborhood alone because we're working collectively to make huge impact.
That's awesome. So, Kurt, if I'm, well, obviously I'm white, I'm Caucasian. So let's help the listeners and watchers. So you're coaching me. Let's say I'm in Milwaukee. Let's say I'm moving into the neighborhood. What do you help coach me personally in my own life? What are some things I could be doing to move towards? Because you told me about bridge builders. So how does that look for me? And then what are some things you ask me not to do? Does that help?
Yeah.
Just to give me a little bit more, because I really want these listeners to walk away and say, okay, I can do that, or I can stay away from trying to do that.
Yeah, I think coming up with I'm going to start out with things not to do, because these are some of the things that I hear people say. Well, I don't want to just throw a check at the problem, and I'm like, who told you that? Like, I didn't tell you that. Nobody from our community didn't tell you that. Like, you guys are getting together and making those decisions.
That's right.
Like, if that's your contribution, let that be your contribution, because that still helps out the situation. So I don't want anybody feeling bad. It's like the only thing that I can contribute is finance. Well, that's a need too, and it helps solve the problem.
Yeah.
So my thing is for people, quit coming up with things that you don't want to do based off of a conversation that you had with people outside of the community. Understand the heart of the community that it is that you want to impact. And so we'll have people that can't make financial contributions, but they can give up their time and effort. And so it's just a matter of finding out, where you fit in. And so I would tell people to certainly get in where you fit in. Now, we have serve days throughout the summer where we allow people to come in, and we'll take on day projects as a way to just kind of bring people together, make some connections. A project could get done, but for the biggest emphasis is again bringing people together and making those connections, because many people that come in, don't even have a relationship with somebody from another ethnicity.
Right.
And so these are what we call platforms to bring people together to be able to make some of those connections. And so I think in order to assist the work again, it could be wherever you're at, whether you want to be hands-on or whether you want to finance projects. I mean, both are completely welcome. And so there's a multitude of ways that people can get involved. And we partner with other organizations as well, where we're having, we partner with Basics. And Basics is an organization that does this thing called Front Row Seat, where they're bringing in people from the city, people in the suburbs. They bring them together over a meal. Let's have a conversation about race. Let's bring understanding. Right. Why does this happen? Why does that happen? And so there are some ways that people can begin to develop relationship. And that's really, let me just say this, is that you won't be able to get it in a book. You won't be able to get it anywhere else besides the understanding that you need in regards to race. It's only going to happen through relationship.
Dive in, be connected, give what you can, do what you can, learn what you can. And there's some benefits probably over the long term in that, but it'll probably change how we think about. I know that when I rub shoulders in different cultures, and largely it's been because I get to travel, whether it's, I've been at believe it or not, a Muslim and Christian conference where the two talk about their likenesses. They talk about the polarity of that, the tension of that. But it taught me something, because I met with imams that were unbelievably gracious and hungry to learn about what I knew. And it's opened my eyes to say, gosh, I wish that's what I want our culture, our world to be. Can we just step in the shoes of other people? And you said it, Kurt, there's a beauty in diversity.
Be willing to be uncomfortable. And specifically, I'm going to speak to I'll speak to Christians, in that sense is because I think the gospel calls us to be uncomfortable. The gospel is not a comfortable gospel, and if
So
it
true.
is, then chances are you're not listening. You're not. You haven't heard the gospel yet. And even but even I would say for those who may not share the Christian faith is when we talk about I think the thing that is universal is love for a neighbor. And that's a beautiful thing because that is one thing that's agreed upon between Christians and
That's
non-Christians
right.
is that we believe have a culture of believing that there's this amazing love for a neighbor, and what does that look like? And our neighbors extend beyond where we live. It extends beyond our race. It extends beyond our culture. And to place yourself in a place of, I mean, because the best way that I'm going to learn about a white person is by being in a relationship with a white person. I
That's
can't
right.
go talk to a black person and say, hey, man, tell me about white people. No, why would I do that? Why would I want to read a book about from a black man
Right,
telling
right.
me about white people when I could just go to the source? And I'm going to say that we got to turn that analogy around. And the best way, and you might like, well, I don't know anybody black. Well, go to an all black church
That's right.
and meet some people there. I mean, it's a real simple fix. Go to an all black college or whatever. And I know it may be weird to walk up to somebody and say, hey, I don't have any black friends. Would you be my friend? But I mean, I think it could be just a very natural progression.
Yeah.
And just, and I think people should not feel threatened to be able to do that. And what you'll find, I think, if you walk into a black church, what you'll find is people are going to come and greet you, and they're gonna introduce themselves to you, and so it kind of takes the weirdness away from it. But just again, being willing to be uncomfortable because being in relationship with the other is what's going to be key. The other thing I'll say is find organizations that are bridging groups together. You'll
Yeah.
find organizations that are having conversations that are intentional about bringing groups together. And the last thing I want to say is, I don't think this gets thrown out there as much, and I probably would get some people probably would challenge me on that. I don't think racism is our issue in our
Mm,
country. I think when I say racism, I'm thinking extremists. I'm
right.
thinking to the right, to the left. That those are extreme. They just hate people based off of skin color. I think the bigger issue in our country is, I'm going to say, ethnocentrism. I don't know, for those who don't understand what that term, that's simply judging somebody else's culture based
Yeah.
off of the standards and social mores of your own culture.
Yeah.
And so because we are so heavily ethnocentristic, people want to protect their culture.
What would you encourage people to be or to think about? Because this is really the last session about boots to the ground, getting this to be a part of aligning their lives to begin to be a multicultural person.
I would encourage people, and I don't want to be selfish, but I am going to encourage people to connect with a organization
Yeah.
that has boots on the ground in the city of Milwaukee. And I'm going to encourage people to connect with the organization that has an African American executive director.
Yeah.
Um, which is really weird because you'll find probably Milwaukee has more nonprofit organizations in the city of Milwaukee than anywhere in the entire country, and yet the African Americans as executive directors are far and few in between, under resourced, and then these are people who are really close to the problem, understand the problem, and yet again under resourced and all of those things. And so I think what that does is if you connect with an organization that has an African American executive director, it gives you the opportunity, one, to develop a relationship and get a great understanding of what the issue is in the city.
That's
And
good.
I think it's just really important. Like when and I speak for myself, like God has just really been amazing in bringing me out of the lifestyle that I once lived. But the fact of the matter is, I did once live that lifestyle, so I have an understanding
Yeah, you do.
of people on the street, and so I'm not just guessing what would be good for people in the community. I can really speak to what would attract and what helps bring people out. So that would probably be my encouragement. Again, it's probably a selfish plug, and I'm not just plugging myself, but I'm just saying any Central City
Yes.
organization that's doing good work, that got boots on the ground because they're under resourced and because the African American community is 400 years behind our white brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
And again, it's nobody's fault here today. And so let me throw that out there. But the fact of the matter is, we will always be 400 years behind. It's almost like you'll never be older than your mom or dad. Like there'll never be true equality. We're always going to be 400. So we need you. So let me just say that. And I tell people that, like, oh, we don't need them. No, yeah, we do. We need our brothers and sisters because they're 400 years ahead. They're always going to be 400 years ahead. Like that's unfortunately, we can't undo what happened.
Right.
But what we can do is we can come together to make the problem a little less problematic.
And again, this is like the second time I've interviewed you, and I'm like, oh gosh, I really want to dive in with you guys. So thank you for being with us. Hopefully, my friends, as you're kind of learning how to walk in your shoes, Kurt's given us some great thoughts, some wisdom, some understanding. Man, begin to take action in your own neighborhood and find a community, a nonprofit organization that's just actually trying to do this work. They're probably going to have some experience that will get you into spaces you need to be. All right. God bless.